Welcome to the Gender in Focus podcast. I'm Elle, and each week I get to ask Kai Scott, the president of Trans Focus Consulting, all the questions you have ever wanted to ask about trans and non-binary people in the workplace and in the wider world.
Often single gender programs or services, they often use very gender specific language. And if you say you're including non-binary folks, then, saying women and girls doesn't quite hit the mark, right? You have to be a little bit more expansive from that.
Maybe an aspect that people don't really think about is that there's, again, it's a bit more than just saying trans women are allowed in this space or non-binary people are allowed in this space. It is necessary for a conversation to happen amongst the people coming in, but also just like everybody in the space, that they are going to be welcoming.
What does it really mean to be inclusive of trans and non-binary people in a single gender organization or program? In this episode, we explore how inclusion goes beyond simply opening the door. It's about preparing your structures, people, and culture to be truly welcoming. We unpack why clarity matters around who your program is for, what can go wrong when organizations skip thoughtful planning, and how a phased approach might support meaningful and affirming participation. Whether you're running a women's program, a men's group, or any gender-specific space, join us as we discuss how to move from passive acceptance to active, respectful inclusion. And I'm excited once again to be joined by Elle in this interesting discussion today on gender-specific programs and spaces. How are you doing?
I'm doing so well. How are you doing today?
Excellent. Yes, I'm doing well also.
Now, this is a topic, as I've told you, that I know absolutely nothing about. So I'm kind of excited to go into this one and hopefully ask the questions that everyone else is thinking. Fingers crossed. And so my first question really is for organizations or programs that are creating single gender spaces. Often they really want to be inclusive, and sometimes they'll kind of make that clear by stating explicitly, we include trans and non-binary people as well in that. So why would organizations kind of make that clear and make that point?
Yeah. So if you're a single gender organization, and there's so many different examples of that, there's women in leadership programs, there's men's support groups, there's, all girls schools, you go down the list and there are spaces carved out for specific genders. And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that, or there's good reasons for carving out those spaces. Sometimes it's important for folks to talk amongst themselves, be amongst themselves, and whatnot. So, that said, if it's not very clear how and if trans and non-binary folks are included, then there's a lot of hesitation for trans folks to approach that type of organization or program, even if it is designed for them. And that's where some organizations, thankfully, have decided to explicitly state, hey, we say this is a women's program, and what we mean by women is XYZ, right? And there's many different ways that people can describe that. But I think it is important to spell that out. If it's a women's program, to say this includes cis and trans women as an example. There's also the extra step of thinking through whether non-binary folks are included. So, some programs that make sense to them, others they want to keep it, specific to a particular gender. So the reason why it's important to consider non-binary is because typically there aren't, that I know of, any non-binary specific programs and spaces. So that's where, if there's space and preparations made, then that folding in of non-binary folks can be really important.
Why is it so important to be clear about who it is that you're including? Because, and I know you've just touched on that, but like sometimes it can be done and it maybe doesn't come across as respectful as people intend. So could you go into that a little bit?
Yes. So it can, rather than defining who is included, it's kind of tacking on people. And it's like, oh yeah, and also, you
Yeah.
bunch of people who we don't quite understand, and we think is maybe a little bit mysterious, but we'll add you in rather than saying we're defining women as this, right? And
Mm,
so that is like very intentional. And or sometimes organizations choose to shift from kind of like who to what, and the what is
yeah.
really helpful because then it's a little bit more expansive inclusion. For example, uh, genders that are typically marginalized in society or face barriers to access, or face some sort of systemic barriers or challenges, and in doing so that includes women, that includes non-binary folks,
Mm,
and so forth. So there are ways to kind of think about it from different angles. But the reason why it's so important is so that folks, uh, in doing it in a thoughtful way, so that
mhm.
people don't kind of feel like they're this other
Yeah.
attached, slapped on the top, and you know, also wonder how well that's going to go, because it's kind of more of a scramble to be like, oh, we didn't include everyone. Okay, quickly say something. Um,
Sure.
but really, it doesn't feel very authentic. Yeah.
Hmm. You've just mentioned about this kind of tagging people on rather than actively including them.
Yeah.
And I was hoping that you could go into that a bit more when it comes to preparing the actual
Mm.
program content or systems or the spaces, like physical
Yeah.
spaces, or just things that maybe people hadn't thought about, rather than just saying non-binary people are included and off you go. There
Right.
must be
Right.
some thought in that when it comes to
Oh,
preparing
for
this
sure.
stuff.
Yeah, yeah, totally. So it's not just the description itself. It goes
Mm,
hopefully deeper than that, where you look at basically from start to finish, somebody coming in and almost test out the different areas to see where would somebody either trip up or not be fully
mhm,
included. If it's a form that somebody has to fill out to be a part of the program or the organization, does it include all the categories, and even the ways that, because often single gender programs or services, they often use very gender specific language. And if
yeah.
you say you're including non-binary folks, then saying women and girls doesn't quite hit the mark, right?
Mhm,
You have to be a little bit more expansive from that. So just at every step of the participation process, looking at, hey, okay, we have content on women, maybe we can add a few articles or booklets or pamphlets that are specific to non-binary folks, or specific to trans women, right?
mhm,
Appreciating that those experiences to some extent will be there will be some distinction. There'll
mhm,
be things in common between cis and trans women, but there will also be distinct things. And so perhaps additional content to underscore that. I've participated in men's programming, which was very affirming in my experience, to be a part of men's groups. However, not everything was relevant to me, which is fine. But then
mhm,
there wasn't any other additional consideration for content that would be relevant to me, that would speak to
mhm,
me directly as a trans man, because I do have distinct experiences. So
mhm,
it does require a little extra legwork to gather those, and maybe in all instances, that not all instances, they might not exist. But that might also be an opportunity. If it doesn't exist, maybe your organization could help create those too, right? So it's not just ending the conversation with like, oh, too bad there's not any resources. It's like, okay, what else could we do to contribute? Um, there's also looking at washrooms to see what kinds of options are available within
mhm,
your building or office, or space. But perhaps if there's not enough options, knowing where else people can go to have their needs met. There's looking at preparing participants as well. So just having people appreciate that not everybody coming through the door may look how society expects for their gender. Of course, that's not just for trans people and non-binary
mhm,
people. That's also for cis people. So that's actually very helpful for a number of different people. So there's all these different places where it's really um, I wouldn't say minor adjustments, but certainly thoughtful adjustments that, if prepared properly, can really be a powerful experience for everybody involved. So, those are just a few suggestions for how to deepen beyond just the statement,
Hmm.
trans women or whoever the specific transgender inclusion is. Yeah.
Hmm. I really wanted to look into something you just said about
Mm.
preparing participants. And I think that's like probably quite important, and maybe an aspect that people don't really think about is that there's,
Yeah.
again, it's a bit more than just saying trans women are allowed in this space or
Mhm.
non-binary people are allowed in this space. It is necessary for a conversation to happen amongst
Mm.
the people coming in, but also just like everybody in the space, that they are going
Mm.
to be welcoming. And what does that preparation look like?
Mhm. Yeah, it's a really important consideration, and organizations and programs, it's good to think it through in terms of what's the culture of the space, the people in it, where are they
Hmm.
at in their understanding of gender diversity. Some may be well advanced; it's not an issue. If it's a queer men's group, for example, maybe not as much discussion. But if it's
Hmm.
folks who have never encountered the 2S LGBTQIA community, then maybe just need to take a little bit more time thinking about whether that's one-on-one conversations, group conversations, or both, right? To help folks understand, um, and for them to appreciate that people come in different shapes, sizes, and looks, and whatnot, and not to have it too narrowly focused on trans and non-binary folks, although that is probably a big driver in this conversation, but to have
Hmm.
it more broadly said, so that people, you're right, because many people in society are focused on how someone appears. If their appearance does not match their gender identity or the gender identity of the space, then people can get lost in that.
Hmm.
And for some, it can bring up anxiety or various emotional responses to that presence. But to have people appreciate that, you know gender identity and gender expression are different things, essentially,
Hmm.
right? And so, for example, when I go into men's spaces, most people don't know that I'm trans unless I've stated it, right? Because I look how
Hmm.
society expects. But if another trans man who perhaps is, say, an early transition, or um, it has a more feminine gender expression, and maybe chooses not to undergo any form of gender affirming care, then yeah, that sticks out to many people, and
Hmm.
they either have questions, comments, stares often,
Hmm.
right? And so just breaking that down for participants to be say, hey, let's not, we all could appreciate how we wouldn't want to stick out like sore thumbs and have that type of treatment. So let's afford that to these folks as well. Just sitting them down, walking them through different types of scenarios and saying, and sometimes even kind of practicing together. It sounds maybe a
Yeah.
bit silly, but there's value in, and that takes off some of that um, moment of like taken aback, if
Hmm.
you've prepared folks for that, to say, we might have, if we're a men's group, we might have somebody who looks a little bit more feminine, we might have somebody who looks a little bit more androgynous, we might have somebody who looks masculine, and then we later on find out that that person was female assigned at birth, right? So
Hmm.
just give them the scenarios, so
Hmm.
that, and then say, what are we going to do? Because we have these values in our group. How are we going to live those values? And so, involving folks, preparing folks, can go a long way, so that if and when a person, trans or non-binary person, shows up, it's not a big thing, and
Hmm.
people are know what to do, and don't feel out of, it's not out of left field. It's like, okay, we
Hmm.
prepared for this, and here it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, just some ideas and suggestions.
No, that's fair. Um, I have seen some spaces that are single gender, but will
Mhm.
say things like, for example, there is a women's group. I won't name it. There's a
Okay.
women's group not far from me who
Ah,
says that they also include trans men. in that space.
Mm.
And
Oh,
I
yeah.
find that quite interesting. And I was
Uh-huh,
wondering if you
uh-huh.
could go into that, because to me, that feels like it would be a very, like, it wouldn't be very affirming
Mhm.
to that, and also could bring up problems within the group too. And I was wondering if you had some thoughts on that, because I can see that people will be trying to be inclusive,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
maybe, well, in my opinion, have got a bit lost. But that doesn't.
Right.
Maybe you have more insight there.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's a really interesting one. I've seen that in many different places as well.
Mm,
So this is not maybe an overarching trend, but it's certainly it pops up here and there.
mm,
For example, in down in the United States, there are a handful of all women colleges, and each one of them is like trying to figure out who to include, how to include, and some have understandably gone, trans women and non-binary folks, but then
mhm,
some have also included basically anyone female assigned at birth in terms of their sex, and that
mhm,
includes trans men, and that's how they've gone. And for me, I understand the desire for inclusion. uh, However, it is sometimes very focused on sex at birth, and
mhm,
and a lot of our society, that's the starting point for understanding gender, or starting and ending really. And
mhm,
so if the focus for trans folks is more often than not on gender identity, which is distinct from their sex at birth, and sex at birth can be kind of painful or just something that we'd rather not think about or talk about.
mhm,
And so the sometimes those programs are reverting back to a sex-based approach, and
mhm,
that is for many trans men not affirming, as you guessed, right? And will not attend that type of meeting because that,
mhm,
including myself, I would not feel comfortable. In fact, I was in a peer support program where I was in a women's group as I came out, and then I said, out of respect for this group, I will no longer go to it because I am not a woman, right? And
mhm,
I want to
mhm,
honor this space that's been created, and so we'll now leave. But of course, there was some pain to it because
mhm,
I was part of a group, and we had gone close to one another, shared things and whatnot. So, some of the people in that group wanted me to stay, and they were willing to kind of carve a space for me as a trans man. But then I said, hey, that doesn't help folks who are new to this group
mhm.
coming in, and like, what the heck is this guy doing here? And
Yeah.
so I was just like, I don't think it works. And
Mhm.
of course, you can stay in touch outside of that group too, right? So,
Right.
um, but there are some very small number of trans men for whom, growing up, being raised as a girl slash into adulthood as a woman, it is a bit of a drop for them,
Mhm.
right? And
Yeah.
so, and especially if it's like a close knit community, whether sports or, a support group or whatever program, it can be a bit of a struggle to let go. And so
Mhm.
there can be situations in which some trans men want to stay, perhaps not
Mhm.
forever, but like as this interim thing. So yeah, so there's some nuance to that as well. But I would err on the side of being very clear, so that, as in defining it based on gender identity rather than trying to do so much inclusion, right?
Mhm.
Of course, there could be specific exceptions. I'm trying to think of some right now, but where there's some complicating or, other nuance that we're not thinking about here. So again,
Mhm.
it's really up to the program to think that through, but I think the rationale is the key thing to anchor into, to make those
Mhm.
types of in some cases tough decisions, right?
Mhm. For sure. You've talked to me before about um, how, in some cases, people will do a sort of phased approach to
Mm,
inclusion, and starting to include trans and non-binary people. And
yeah.
I was wondering if you could go into, like, when that would make sense to do that sort of phased approach,
Mm.
and what that actually looks like.
Yeah, it's phased approaches, I think, are really important, especially if an organization is maybe a bit larger or maybe a bit nervous to take
Mm.
this on, or perhaps there are stakeholders whether participants or board members or whoever who are expressing some concern or anxiety around this type of step, then it makes sense to do it more gradually, to
Mhm.
understand what the needs are of the existing participants, understanding the needs of the incoming participants, trans and non-binary or non-binary, and then to kind of piece by piece build it over time. You could just try one. If you're an organization with multiple programs that are single gender, you just start with one program or one, session, or it just,
Mhm.
maybe not one session because you want to have it have some long-term effect, but just some area where it maybe makes a little bit more sense or it's easier to start.
Mhm.
Maybe agreeing, having existing participants understand and then agree to it, and then,
Mhm.
as a like, let's try it out type of approach. That can often times take the edge off, because if it's going to be forever, people can kind of dig in their heels a bit, versus let's see where this goes, and we just want to see what this is about. um, and in doing so, there's much more ability to create comfort and safety, and actually be meaningful in that approach without having to kind of lock it in. Because if you have to
Mhm.
figure everything out before launching something, that's can be quite daunting, rather than just starting
Yeah,
small.
I can
And then
imagine.
getting feedback, like from any participant, from all participants, to say, how was your experience of this? And if it makes sense, to discuss it even. And then once based on that feedback, then figuring out either adjusting slightly or maybe even a lot, and or building upon it. Maybe it was a huge success and people
Mhm.
really enjoyed it, valued it, and got so much out of it because people got to share from their experiences, some in common, some distinct. And people were like, I want more of that. And then you can, okay, well, let's keep doing it. And or there was some unexpected thing that came about, and you find from various participants that they would like a little bit more kind of shared experiences, and then it's important not to define it based on identity, and it's more about shared experiences of a group,
Right.
and that can help, because
Mhm.
otherwise, you could get into a situation where you're like really splicing and dicing people.
Right.
And that's
Sure.
again, the who to what can be really powerful and helpful, right? um, People who are, I don't know, people who are getting ready for pregnancy, like
Right.
that,
Yeah, yeah.
that's a helpful. Or if you want, you can put women and people, preparing for pregnancy as an example of like, okay, this is what they're sharing in common, and they're trying to figure
Mhm.
out a way forward. Yeah, so
I
just
love
some
that.
thoughts.
Mhm. Transfocus has worked with a lot of organizations who are looking to kind of improve their inclusivity when it comes to trans and non-binary people. And I was wondering if you have some examples that you've seen or that you've worked with that have been like have done this well, that have created this inclusion in a way that works really well, and what specifically made their approach
Hmm,
work.
yeah. So there are a handful of organizations where we came in and did consultation sessions. So
Hmm.
talked to not just trans and non-binary folks who would have been interested in joining this single gender program, or yeah, offering, uh, but also to the existing people who came there to say, hey, we're thinking of adding, these layers,
Mm.
and to kind of let them have their responses to that, which sometimes includes, some anxiety or fear that things are going to change, that it'll be different, that, whatever comes up, right? So I think
Hmm.
those are important to listen to, while also still trying to figure out how to carve out space, and include trans and non-binary folks. In some instances, that might require even a name change, which there's some complexity to that, right? Because
Hmm.
if
Can imagine.
some organization has like distinct branding,
Hmm.
then adding folks, then you have to rebrand in a way that you might not be as recognizable.
Hmm.
And So to think that through. Um, but it coming up with kind of clever ways to do that that can still kind of keep some of the brand intact
Hmm.
while perhaps changing some of the wording. I'm being vague because I also I don't want to like
Yeah.
expressly state who that is because we haven't gotten permission, right? We want to honor
Hmm.
and respect and
I
keep
realized
confidential.
that, yeah, I realized that I sort of dropped that in, just like, can you give us all the details of these
Ah,
organizations that have been?
yes,
Yeah, my
they're
bad.
the ins and outs. But yeah, I mean, we can still speak about it broadly. And I think what
Hmm.
helped was the thoughtful process that they were willing to undertake and to have iterative conversations about this. It's not kind of a one and done. It's more we're wanting to change. We're trying to figure out how much to change. That was like a big question, is how much and how far, because there are situations in which at some point it becomes all gender, right?
Hmm.
And that's okay. There may be good reason to do that in certain organizations, um,
Hmm.
but it's like it's an intentional decision that is backed with rationale and yeah, and just knowing exactly what one is going into, um, and also recognizing that for some it'll be really exciting, for others a little bit of trepidation at first, but then ultimately on board, and then for some it won't work, right? And
Hmm.
so there could also, it's important to know that there could be also a cost to that in terms of participants not wanting to continue with that
Hmm.
organization. So it is there are layers to this, so that's important to go through it thoughtfully. And we have
Hmm.
seen that at various organizations. There are some organizations we've worked with that have said, we would love to include all kinds of trans and non-binary folks, but we're only willing to go, say, for example, in an all women's context, we're only willing to go to include trans women, and that's it.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, hey, that's important. You've made that
Hmm.
decision. Including non-binary folks felt like they couldn't do it genuinely and fully to the extent that they wanted to. It wasn't that they're like, nah, to
Yeah.
non-binary folks. It's just they just were realistic about what they could do. And I think that
Hmm.
is really important, to be realistic rather than aspirational, because I think many
Right.
people want to be inclusive. We want to include folks, but in some cases, it's not possible for all, given the realities of resources and time
Hmm.
and whatnot. So yeah,
And it can always come later, I suppose.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. hmm One thing I did want to specify though, non-binary folks are always there. I mean, like I'm saying anything
Hmm.
that is going to shock you, Elle.
No.
But so in some instances, if non-binary folks aren't included, basically it puts the non-binary folks who are already in your midst in a bit of a bind,
Hmm.
right? So either they just stay quiet about being non-binary, which some people choose to do,
Hmm.
or they leave, or a whole number of things, or they might be vocal about being non-binary, even though perhaps there's a more restrained scope has been drawn. So it's not as kind of cut and dry. Like, you know, people exist everywhere, and so it's just
Right.
like whether they're doing that honestly or not is kind of the main thing.
I think, yeah, that's there are many women's groups that I've been part of, as a non-binary person, that I have just not told people that I'm non-binary. So, uh, yeah, it's whether they're included or not, they will be there.
Exactly.
So
Yeah, that's the thing. But it
probably.
doesn't. I can imagine, and you can tell me if that's the case for you. It doesn't feel. Yeah, for me, it wouldn't feel great if
Mm-mm.
that wasn't somehow given space for.
No, and especially if it's sort of made clear that non-binary people are not part of this. I've had one situation where uh, women, including trans women, and that was the reason I went, was because I was like, great, this is inclusive. But then a conversation happened, was like, we're not ready to expand that to non-binary people, and I was like, oh. I'll keep my mouth
Oh,
shut. So, and
yeah.
it's fine, but it's I understand that, but also uh, you're sort of unintentionally excluding someone who's already there. So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And then not being able to speak to that part, uh,
Hmm.
that would be awful. It's just like,
Mm.
I know some organizations can be hesitant. I appreciate people wanna do that genuinely and fully,
Hmm.
and so may think there's a lot of extra preparation, and there is preparation. Like, I don't want to say that there's nothing, because
Hmm.
then we're getting into more the aspirational, like, oh, of course we include everyone, but not really. And
Right.
so, yeah, we want to like include folks, and so then I'm definitely taking that step to do that because non-binary folks are in our midst. I think it's similar to what you described, that if somebody is non-binary is already in the program,
Hmm.
if the program actively decides not to include non-binary folks or explicitly, then that person is in a bind when there's not that much extra work to include non-binary folks. And so, while I want people or organizations to be honest about
Hmm.
how far they're able to go, uh, I think also it's important to kind of maybe even push a little bit past one's comfort zone, and to be able to achieve that. And perhaps it's in a gradual way, start with something and then continue to build. But I would really encourage to continue to build,
Hmm.
especially for non-binary inclusion, just because there's no place else for non-binary folks to go, right? Like,
Hmm.
there are gender specific spaces, but there's no, at least not for now, but maybe in the future there'll be non-binary specific places. But, so it's just like people need support, and uh, organizations can include, and it's not that much of an extra heavy lift, and it means the world to folks, or it really makes a huge difference. And I think maybe there's another aspect of the transparency where it's like we want to include non binary folks. We recognize that we don't have everything in place, right? Like, we
Hmm.
wish we had content, and we wish we had, X, Y,
Sure.
and Z, right? Whatever the thing is. Um, we want to train our facilitators, right? Or something to be ready, better
Hmm.
able to facilitate more expansively in terms of gender. And then that at least gives people enough information to know what they're walking into. So
Hmm.
non-binary folks can make an informed decision about what they're walking into. But still, yeah,
Hmm.
wish people could, get up to speed.
Yeah, for sure. If it's okay with you, I would love
Mhm.
to kind of close this with talking about your experience, because you've told me about your time at
Mm.
university, and I'd love to hear from you about that if you're up for it.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. So for my undergrad, I went to, before I came out as trans, I was at a all women's college. I went to Bryn Mawr, and it was a lovely experience. I really enjoyed it. Uh, it's about 1,200 or so students. It's in Philadelphia, and it's interesting because having gone to an all women's college, now that I'm out as a trans man, that
Mm.
presents many different challenges is too far, but it kind of interesting interactions.
Mm, I
So
can imagine.
when people ask me, where did you go to college, which sometimes comes up, where'd you go to university, I kind of first assess, if they're from the East Coast, I'll be a little bit more cautious, right? If I don't want to out
Mm.
myself as trans, I will be careful, like who I share, specific place that I went to college. If somebody is in the West Coast, they usually don't know Bryn Mawr, so I'm just like, okay, whatever, I'll just say it.
Yeah.
But yeah, if they know that Bryn Mawr is an all women's college, that kind of outs me,
Right.
as or what has happened to me before when I forget about all of this is that I'll be like, yeah, I went to Bryn Mawr. I'm like, oh, Bryn Mawr, that's great, college, but when did it become co-ed, or when did it go all gender, you know?
Oh.
And then I was like, "Mm."
Oh
It
man.
hasn't? Or sometimes, like, if I really don't wanna out myself, I'll just be like, I don't know." Or just, like, play dumb, right? So it's just, like, weird, awkward interactions, based
Mm,
on if people know Bryn Mawr as being an all-women's college, and, of course, all women's colleges do shift out of that, so it's not like out of yeah, out of question.
mhm.
I have gone to the 10-year reunion many years ago,
Oh
at Bryn
really?
Mawr, and that was
How did
interesting
that
too.
go? Yeah.
Yeah, that was once I was out as a trans man, and then I met, a handful of other trans men, so I was like, "Okay."
Oh really?
Yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah,
that's interesting.
yeah, so
That's funny.
and people are understanding and supportive and
Mhm.
very kind. There's no big issue, but there's things like, from a systems perspective, as an example, is I get, as an alum of Bryn Mawr, I get donation requests, and for the longest time they kept saying Ms, right? Because they just
Mm,
automatically go to Ms, given that it's a gender specific organization. And so these are the small things, right, that if they're expanding and whatnot. But I think Bryn Mawr doesn't include trans men in their admissions, if I
they
remember
do?
correctly. Yeah. So as a
Trans
trans
men.
man, yeah. Back to your original.
That's interesting.
I know. That was very controversial when they voted on it. I can't remember how many years ago.
Really?
So yeah, so it's just it's an interesting situation, to go to
Mm,
an all women's. Obviously, it's a well respected university.
mhm.
It's you know excellent education. So beyond the gender piece, I understand, but unfortunately, if it is advertised and positioned as a women's college, it doesn't, like, they're not intending this, but they are kind of saying trans men aren't men,
Right. Yeah.
right? Because they're not going to
That's
admit a cisgender man, right?
right. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Interesting.
interesting stuff. Yeah, I'm trying to
Mm,
think of what else, as it pertains to being, having gone to an all women's college, but those are some of the kind of interesting experiences as having gone to that kind of gender specific space.
mhm. Thank you so much for sharing that.
If you're an gender specific organization or program and are starting to think about expanding to trans and or non-binary folks, it's really helpful to ask yourself some questions as a kind of first step into what's at play, thinking about where to look and how to prepare things, what it would kind of take to make those adjustments. So that people can be truly welcomed and included. And so, yeah, it's a very brief resource, but at least it gets the ball rolling for your organization and starts to help you and your leadership clarify things.
Mhm.
So hopefully, it's useful step in a much bigger process. But yeah, that's what we're going to offer, and will be in the show notes in case it's of interest. And even if you're not a single gender org or program, yeah, it's well worth taking a look to see how we can kind of expand beyond just one single gender.
Mhm. Great. Thank you so much, Kai.
Yeah,
I'll
absolutely. Thank you
see you
so
next week.
much.